Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, social scientists, government and nonprofit leaders. We speak with each one to one. I'm delighted to welcome Eleanor Jackson Piel to the program today. She's been called the legend you never heard of, but the one we should all get to know. Born into a privileged background, she felt drawn to help society's underdogs. At a time when there were few women lawyers, she pursued a career in the law. And for more than 6 decades as a civil rights attorney, she worked to right the wrongs done to those who had few resources. Her cases sometimes set precedents, just as she has in so many ways. Welcome.
Thank you.
It was so interesting to read your biography. You have represented the victims of racial discrimination, of sexual discrimination. You've had defended people who were on death row, who were convicted of crimes that they didn't commit. And yet, your name is not a household word the way like Bill Kunstler or F. Lee Bailey. Why?
Well, I think that has to do with the position of women at the time that I was practicing law. People just didn't believe that a woman was doing what I was doing.
I also think men are better at self-promotion.
Yes, yes. Well, the mention of Bill Kunstler, he had a case, interestingly enough, he had a case that involved a young man who was on the witness stand he was questioned by police for 20 days, and this was all in the papers. And finally, on the 20th day, the judge said, "You can't talk to the press any longer." And Bill Kunstler came out of the courtroom and happened to be in my building, or happened to get there. And he saw me in the hallway and he said, "Eleanor, I have a case for you." Mm-hmm. And I took the case.
Wow. What happened? What happened?
Well, the young man was charged with setting a fire that killed 12 people in a Jewish community center in White Plains. And I had a trial, and because everyone had read in the newspaper, including the jury, including the judge, how this young man had been interrogated for 26 days and had confessed to setting this fire, I didn't have much of a chance. The jury listened to me, but convicted him. Mm-hmm. And then something rather wonderful happened. I knew that I had to win this case because I knew this young man was innocent. And I thought a lot about it and moped a lot about it. And one day I saw a wonderful woman whose name is Linda Greenhouse, and she was a cub reporter on the New York Times. And I spilled my guts, and I told her how terrible this was. And she listened to me carefully, and she went and wrote a story that appeared in the New York Times. And this was the first time that anything had been said affirmatively about this young man. His name was Thomas Rupert. And as a result, the Court of Appeals granted me leave to appear before them, and they listened to my argument, and they reversed the conviction.
Wow.
And the young man was free.
So you went to law school back in the 40s.
Yes.
When there were not a lot of women lawyers. What made you interested in the law? You couldn't have had many role models.
No, well, I really wasn't interested in the law. I wanted to be where the action was, and I wanted to be a newspaper woman. And my father wouldn't pay the tuition at Columbia School of Journalism, where my friends had gone that had been newspaper women. And so I decided law was the second best thing. So that would be where the action was. And I've sure had a lot of action.
You have. What was it like? You were the only woman to graduate in your graduating class from Berkeley's law
Yes,
school.
but that was because there was a war on, and there were only 11 people in the class, and it had started with 300 people. So that wasn't so that really wasn't so unusual. Except I guess it was unusual, but the unusualness can be attributed to other things.
Had there been other women in the class who left because of the war?
I don't think there were any women really in my class,
Right.
but women would kind of drift in, and you see, you take courses,
Right.
and you never know just where the person taking the course is in terms of his or her graduation.
Right, right.
So I think a woman or two drifted by from time to time.
Okay, but you were the only one who graduated in
That's
that
right.
class.
That's right.
So, like most women who went to law school back there, you were not able to get a job at a law firm. You wound up clerking for a federal judge, and as a result of working with him, you were witness to a big case that involved some Japanese American men
Yes.
who had refused the draft and were being indicted.
That's
you
right.
know, for that. And these were men who had been interned, and they had
That's
been
right. They were in a disloyal concentration camp.
right.
But they wanted the government wanted to draft them, and there were, I think, 21 of them, and I just thought that was wrong, and I had a wonderful judge who agreed with me, and I had no books to look up law on, and so I concentrated on the language in the Selective Service Act, which spoke of a free society and people supporting the government in a free society, and that somehow won the day, and the judge wrote a wonderful opinion.
And dismissed the indictments against them, right?
Yes,
Dismissed the indictment.
He dismissed the indictment, and this was the only case favorable to the Japanese Americans in our country
During the war.
during the war.
Wow. Was this the case that made you realize you had an affinity for underdogs?
No, I don't think I.
No?
I don't think so. I think I always knew I did.
Where did that come from?
Well, I think it came from the fact that my father was a Jew and my mother was not Jewish, and my mother went away, and I stayed with my grandmother for a while, and she took me to Sunday school. She was not Jewish. It was a Christian Sunday school, and I learned about God's chosen people in Sunday school, and I learned a little bit about the Bible. And when my mother came back, I went to school in Santa Monica, and the first day I was in school, I told all my friends that I was part of God's chosen people. And when my mother heard about this, she blew her top, and I guess that's kind of the beginning of it.
So it was the idea of, well, that Jews had faced a lot of oppression, and was
I don't
that-
think I was oppressed.
No, you were not.
But Jews were.
Certainly, certainly.
In fact, we live in a very, at that time, I don't know how it is, that it was a very anti-Semitic sort of atmosphere. And my mother was, I guess she was part of those people, because she would say to me, "When you wear that hat, Eleanor, you look too Jewish."
Oh, wow, wow. So in Los Angeles, back in 1948, you opened your own law firm. What kinds of clients did you have?
That's an interesting question. Well, at that time, what kinds of clients? I had a connection with an old age pension group, and I think that was sort of my entry into the law. The old age pensioners had children, and they had all kinds of problems, and that was it.
But it was really after you married your husband, who was a magazine editor, and moved to New York, that your career as a civil rights lawyer really took off.
That's not true.
No, okay.
No, no.
Correct me.
I was doing everything I was doing before I was married. I continued after I was married.
Okay, okay.
And you see, I didn't get married till I was about nearly 35.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, I thought I was going to be an old maid. My mother thought I was going to be an old maid. And so that made, that was quite a change, because I had to move from Los Angeles to New York.
Mm-hmm. How did you meet your husband, who was the editor of Scientific American?
Well, I had an office in a little building in Los Angeles, which is now the Music Center. And in that little building, every day at 5 o'clock, the different people would come in and have a drink and have a conversation. And my husband was in New York, and he was visiting in Los Angeles, and Carrie McWilliams, who was the editor of The Nation, told him if he was ever in Los Angeles, he had to look up this wonderful man by the name of Robert Kenney, who'd been the Attorney General of the state of California. And so he looked him up, and there I was. So I met him.
Okay, and the rest was history.
That's right.
We're going to take a short break. Then we'll be back with more with Eleanor Jackson Piel after the following messages.
Ma, guess what? I went back to college. No, I didn't quit my job. I'm finishing my degree with the CUNY Online Bachelor's in Business. I interact online with real City University of New York faculty on a schedule that fits my busy life. Ma, you should look who's teaching at CUNY. And it all leads to a high-quality Bachelor of Science degree in business. I can attend class anywhere, anytime. Yes, Mom, even at your house Friday night for dinner.
The CUNY Online Baccalaureate. Get back to business.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Eleanor Jackson Piel, civil rights attorney without equal. In New York, you defended William Epton, who was a communist and a labor organizer who was charged with anarchy and riot for statements that he made during the Harlem riots in the 60s. You also defended Fred Hernandez, who was charged with advocating the overthrow of the New York State government. Now, you lost both of those cases, but what did you learn from them?
How tough it was to be a dissenter or to go against society, to even advocate going against against the general idea of what is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You also handled the case of along with, I think it was the National Lawyers Guild, went down south. You handled the case of Sandra Addix.
Yes.
She was a New York school teacher who's participated in a lunch counter sit-in with some of her students down in Mississippi.
That's right.
And they refused her service along with the black students.
No, they served the blacks, but didn't serve the whites that came with them.
Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
But you won a settlement in that case.
Well, actually, the case went to the United States Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. That was the big aspect of it. And it was never settled for very much. I didn't make any money in that case.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it was a wonderful case because it developed on a Supreme Court level the extent of the discrimination in the South.
Mm-hmm. You handle some women's rights cases, including the case of a 13-year-old girl, a math whiz, who wanted to go to Stuyvesant High School, which at that time was an all-male high school.
That's right.
Now, I noticed that, and there was no similar high school for girls at that time?
That's right. There was no similar high school, and there was no program in the city schools that provided what Stuyvesant provided. And it's just this Christmas, I got a wonderful Christmas card and pictures of of what happened then from the newspapers, and I was very impressed.
Now, I noted, and you won that case,
Yes.
correct?
Well, it wasn't a case, actually. Well, I guess it was. She had been turned down, and by my advocacy, I got her in.
She was allowed, was she the first girl at Stuyvesant?
Yes.
And did Stuyvesant then go co-ed shortly after that?
I don't think anything happened shortly.
Okay, okay, but eventually, as we know.
Eventually, yes.
You also represented some women professors at Albert Einstein College of Medicine who
Oh,
felt
that was a big case. That involved the main plaintiff was a pediatrician who had complained about her salary for years, that she was getting too little, and there's no question she was. The theory behind paying women less was that they had husbands, and therefore they could be supported by their husbands, and they didn't need the money. But my client, Edna Sobo, didn't have a husband, and so not that really made a difference.
Right.
But she didn't, and she had been complaining about not making enough. And this one involved something very interesting. It involved my having to learn about regression analysis, which is a concept in mathematics which I never run across. And by my learning how to handle it, I was able to convince the Second Circuit that she and a whole group of women who had been part of this, of the prejudice against women, that they had been discriminated against, and we won a nice settlement. And then I was launched into that area
Right.
of representation.
Right. Among your criminal defendants, Ernie Miller, a man who, along with his half-brother, was convicted of murdering and setting fire to a woman near Tampa, Florida, and sentenced to death. But he had basically been framed for the murder by the police and the prosecution. The victim wasn't even who they said she was. What was it like? Was this your first death row case?
Yes, I think it was. I think so. But I didn't realize it. It came about because there was an advertisement an article in the New York Times that said there were 3,000 people on death row, and they didn't have lawyers. And so I looked. This was in the Times, and it was just when I was going to take a trip with my husband that was called off, and I had a clean desk, which was very unusual for me. And I had, well, I could say I had nothing to do. So I looked through the 3,000 on death row. I mean, so I looked through the list, and I called a number of places, and I found a place in Florida, a center that needed lawyers. And I called them, and they said, "Did you ever do a habeas corpus case?" And I said, "Yes." So it's 12 days later, I got a big file. The case, you mentioned Ernie Miller. He was the half-brother of my main client, who was William Riley Gent.
Oh, okay, okay.
And so the case really was Gent's case.
I see.
Although Miller was also sentenced to death, so that they were both defendants. And I worked very hard on it, and as a result, I got them both out.
Wonderful. Another case, you also got into the whole DNA area, innocence area. Your client was Warith, I can't pronounce it, Warith Habib Abdal, who had been convicted of rape, and DNA eventually freed him, but you represented him over a long period of time,
over a long
right?
period of time, and in fact, I represented him. What had happened? He was what we call, I don't know what you call him, but he was on the edges of the law. He a black man in Manhattan, and he was always in some kind of trouble. And so I met him because I was appointed to represent him, having to do with a situation he got into where he'd won in the numbers, and he had a lot of money on him, and he was being chased, and he got a gun and he shot at them, and he killed the woman, and he injured the man, and then they arrested him and sent him to jail. And I was appointed to represent him, and I thought the whole thing was a terrible miscarriage of justice because he shot in self-defense. They were after him. They'd cut him on his arm as they were running after him. And so I made a big fuss about it. But anyway, he was sentenced to 12 years and spent 12, he was sentenced to longer than that, but he spent 12 years in prison on this. And when he came out, he came to see me. And I said, well, let's figure out a better way of life for you. And he said, well, I can't stay around here in New York because of my record. So I'll go to Buffalo. So he went off to Buffalo. And there the minute he got to Buffalo, they looked at his record, and the police had some rape cases that they didn't have a proper defendant for, and they accused him of rape. And they brought a woman in who had said she'd been raped and had given quite an extensive story of what had happened, and none of the story matched any aspect of this particular situation, but it didn't matter. He was convicted of rape and sent to prison for, I think it was 50 years. And of course, I had already been involved with him, so I followed it. He had another lawyer in Buffalo. I followed the case. And
it really took developments in the DNA science that eventually
well, yes.
Right.
Yes. Well, that came later because it turned out that he was turned down. His case was turned down in New York, and in Buffalo again he was turned down, and so I decided that we had to do something about the DNA, and I found that there was a rape kit, and I got the hold of the rape kit, and I got the court to permit me to send it to a laboratory, and the Federal Express lost the rape kit, so I was out, and I was quite miserable about it, naturally, because I thought that this was going to be the solution to his case. When I guess it was maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months, I got a call from the scientist on the other side who said, "We found a little more DNA, do you want it?" And of course I accepted it with alacrity, and
that was
yes, and that
how he was released.
Well, of course it didn't come right away,
right?
But that was the key.
We only have a couple more minutes, but what was your most satisfying case to work on?
I think the most satisfying was the Rupert one, the young man who was convicted of 12 murders, and then he was acquitted of all of them, but it was too much for him, and he became an alcoholic and died shortly after he was released from prison. It was a sad case, but that was one that really, really moved me.
Well, you have certainly had a fascinating career. I would think a very rewarding career.
I think so, too.
In the law. It sounds like you've got a book. There's a book in there someplace.
Well, I'm in the middle of writing a memoir, but I don't know where I'm going to get with it.
Okay. Well, we look forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sheryl.
We're out of time. I want to thank Eleanor Jackson Piel for joining me today. It's really been an honor. For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. If there are any people you'd like to hear from or topics you'd like us to explore, please let us know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.